The Precursor reactor sat in the middle of the excavation crater, like a particularly stubborn god who decided retirement wasn't going according to plan. 300 meters of crystalline alloy and impossible geometry, humming with the kind of dormant power that made physicists weep and insurance adjusters resign on the spot. It had been sitting there for approximately 47,000 years, give or take a few millennia, which in galactic terms meant it predated most of the current civilization's ability to tie their metaphorical shoelaces. The Ythrani had found it first, naturally. Because the Ythrani found everything first, they had a cultural obsession with being the smartest beings in any given solar system, which worked out beautifully for them in roughly 60% of cases, and resulted in spectacular hubris-flavored disasters in the remaining 40. They'd immediately recognized it as precursor technology, that mythical category of ancient artifacts that either revolutionized your entire civilization or exploded in ways that required inventing new words for catastrophe. What followed was 17 years of the most sophisticated, well-funded, academically peer-reviewed failure in modern galactic history. The Ythrani had brought in the collective's best cryptographer. The reactor's interface had laughed at them, metaphorically speaking, though several scientists swore they heard actual laughter. The Drachnori contributed their quantum computation matrices, devices so advanced they occasionally calculated answers to questions that wouldn't be asked for another decade. The reactor remained as responsive as a particularly apathetic boulder. The Hick Unity offered their bio-neural integration specialists, beings who could interface with technology using nothing but aggressive optimism and several redundant nervous systems. The reactor's security systems had, in response, generated what could only be described as a cosmic shrug. The excavation site had transformed into a monument to academic frustration. Prefabricated research stations dotted the crater's edge like spectators at the galaxy's most boring sporting event. Cables snaked everywhere, connecting sensor arrays and analysis equipment and hope-powered coffee machines. The entire operation had cost approximately the GDP of a mid-sized moon colony, and produced exactly zero tangible results beyond a comprehensive catalog of things that definitely didn't work. At the center of this circus of failure stood Professor Zenthalok, a Ythrani whose 3 doctoral degrees and 5 published dissertations on precursor technology had prepared him for everything except the soul-crushing reality that the universe didn't particularly care about his credentials. His chitinous plates had dulled from their usual lustrous blue to something approaching bureaucratic beige. He stood before the reactor's main interface panel, a surface covered in symbols that probably meant something profound and currently meant access denied in several thousand languages. The security architecture is unprecedented, he announced to his assembled team for the 8,000th time, which was approximately 7,999 times more than anyone needed to hear it. Layered biometric scans, quantum encrypted access codes, temporal verification locks that check if you're authorized in the past, present, and future. The precursors didn't want anyone accessing this system. They wanted to ensure that accessing it was theoretically impossible. A Drachnori engineer whose name translated roughly to persistent failure in most languages, raised one of her 7 appendages. We've tried every known biometric signature in the galactic database. Ythrani, Drachnori, heck, even those weird silicon-based entities from the outer drift. We've generated 17 billion potential access codes, added a Hick analyst, their translator making them sound perpetually exhausted, which was accurate. We've fed them into the system in every possible sequence. Nothing. Not even an error message. Just silence. The professor's mandibles clicked in what might have been agreement or might have been the sound of his sanity attempting escape. The precursors were paranoid to a degree that makes modern military encryption look like leaving your front door unlocked with a welcome. That's when the transport shuttle arrived, kicking up ancient dust and thoroughly ruining several very expensive atmospheric purity sensors. It was a human vessel, which meant it was held together with an alarming combination of legitimate engineering and what appeared to be desperate improvisation. The cargo door opened with a hydraulic wheeze that suggested the shuttle had feelings about its career choices. Out stepped the human. She was average height by human standards, which meant short by galactic ones. Her environment suit was standard issue, the kind that came with 17 safety warnings, and a disclaimer about not being responsible for acts of God, war, or general stupidity. She carried a toolkit that had seen better decades and wore the expression of someone who'd been traveling through hyperspace for 3 weeks and desperately needed a bathroom. You've got to be joking, muttered one of the Draknori technicians. The professor approached with the kind of diplomatic smile that barely concealed active horror. Welcome to excavation site Gamma 77. I'm Professor Xanthalok. You must be the technical consultant the Galactic Union's. The human squinted at him, then at the reactor, then back at him. Yeah, got the work order about 12 jumps ago. Says here you need someone to look at a malfunctioning reactor core. It's not malfunctioning. It's a precursor artifact that has successfully resisted all attempts at activation for 17 standard years. So, malfunctioning. Several alien scientists made choking sounds that their translators struggled to render into coherent audio. The human shrugged and started walking toward the reactor, boots crunching on ground that hadn't seen footprints in 47 millennia. The assembled scientist watched with the horrified fascination of people witnessing someone walk confidently toward a disaster, while humming a tune about workplace status. You understand, the professor called after her, his voice climbing several octaves, that this artifact has defeated the finest scientific minds in 7-star systems. Aha! That we've exhausted every conventional and unconventional approach to accessing its systems. That attempting to interface with it without proper authorization protocols could theoretically trigger security measures that might sterilize this entire planet. The human stopped, turned around and pulled out a datapad that had been held together with what appeared to be adhesive tape in spite. Work order says check the reactor. You want me to check the reactor, or not? The professor's plates rippled with something between resignation and the kind of curiosity that preceded either breakthrough discoveries or career-ending incidents. By all means. The human resumed her approach to the reactor's main interface. Every sensor array in the excavation site turned to track her movements, feeding data to analysis computers that were already composing strongly worded reports about protocol violations. She stopped in front of the crystalline panel, tilting her head like she was looking at a particularly confusing appliance manual. The reactor's surface shimmered with ancient symbols, each one representing security measures that had taken centuries to develop and would theoretically take lifetimes to breach. Access codes from civilizations that existed when the galaxy was younger and more optimistic. Biometric locks calibrated for species that evolution had forgotten. Quantum verification systems that checked your authorization status across parallel realities just to be thorough. The human reached out and touched the panel experimentally. Nothing happened. She frowned, leaned closer, and squinted at the symbols like they might make more sense from a different angle. They didn't. Behind her, the assembled scientists held their collective breath, which represented 7 different respiratory systems all simultaneously questioning their life choices. That's when the human's nose twitched. Human noses, it should be noted, were evolutionary holdovers, from a time when humans needed to detect predators, food, and whether that mysterious smell in the cave was dangerous or just unfortunate. In the modern era, they mostly served to make humans miserable during allergy season, and provide comedic timing for the universe's more ironic moment. The human's expression shifted through several stages of realization, awareness, alarm, resignation, and finally that special look humans get when they know something embarrassing is about to happen, and they're powerless to stop it. Oh no, the sneeze when it came was spectacular. Human sneezes are already impressive by biological standards. A violent expulsion of air and moisture designed to clear nasal passages with the subtlety of a small explosion. This particular sneeze was special, carrying with it the accumulated dust of ancient worlds, recycled spacecraft air, and 3 weeks of hyperspace travel in a poorly ventilated shuttle. It hit the reactor's interface panel directly. For one perfect moment, nothing happened. The universe held its breath. Somewhere, probability itself paused to check its notes. Then the reactor booted up. The first sign that reality had taken a profoundly unexpected turn was the sound. Not the dramatic power-up hum that movies promised, but a sort of confused whirring, like ancient machinery waking up after a very long nap and wondering why everyone was staring. Lights began cascading across the reactor's surface in patterns that hadn't been seen since humans were still figuring out that hitting rocks together could be useful. Professor Xanthalok's academic composure, carefully maintained through 17 years of professional disappointment, shattered like cheap glass. What did you do? The human wiped her nose with the back of her glove, looking equally bewildered. I sneezed? The professor's translator struggled with the inflection, settling somewhere between existential horror and hysterical laughter. 17 years of computational analysis, quantum decryption, temporal authentication protocols, and she sneezed on it, finished the Draknari engineer, her 7 appendages hanging limp in a posture that conveyed defeat across species boundary. The hick analyst had stopped functioning entirely, his translator emitting only a faint buzzing sound that might have been the digital equivalent of weep. Around the crater, scientists abandoned their stations to crowd closer, instruments forgotten, academic dignity evaporating like morning dew under twin sun. The reactor's interface was actively responding now, symbols rearranging themselves into configurations that the assembled computational power of 7 civilizations hadn't predicted. Holographic displays bloomed in the air, showing data streams in formats that were simultaneously ancient and somehow intuitive. Energy readings spiked across every sensor array, sending analysis programs into fits of confused recalculation. "This is impossible," declared a Ythrani cryptographer, who'd spent 8 years of her life trying to crack just the first security layer. "The biometric requirements alone demand cellular-level authentication from authorized species. We've tested every known genetic profile in the galactic database. Clearly you missed one," the human offered helpfully, still looking like someone who'd stumbled into the wrong party and was too polite to leave. The professor's plates were cycling through colors that probably meant something significant in Ythrani culture, but currently just looked like an organic mood ring, having an identity crisis. "You're suggesting that humans, a species that achieved interstellar flight, roughly 300 years ago, are somehow the authorized operators of precursor technology that predates your entire civilization by 47 millennia. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm standing here confused while your fancy ancient reactor decides my sneeze was the correct password." One of the Draknari technicians was frantically pulling up genetic analysis data, her workstation screen filling with comparative charts that were probably very scientific and definitely unwelcome. "The biological markers, there are similarities. Trace elements in the expelled moisture, amino acid configurations, protein structures. Nothing exact, but there's a pattern compatibility that shouldn't exist." "Pattern compatibility," the professor repeated flatly. "You're telling me that this security system, sophisticated enough to verify authorization across temporal dimensions, accepted a sneeze as valid credentials because of pattern compatibility? I'm telling you the reactor thinks it got the right biological signature, and apparently whoever built this thing had sinuses." The human had started backing away from the reactor, hands raised in universal "I didn't do it" gesture, which was undermined by the fact that she obviously had done it, even if nobody understood how. Her retreat was complicated by the circle of scientists that had formed around her, studying her like she was an artifact that had started spontaneously solving its own mystery. "Don't move," commanded the professor, which caused the human to immediately freeze in a way that suggested past experiences with authority figures. "We need to document this. Run every possible scan, genetic analysis, biometric profiling, trace element detection. Find out what's in human biology that matches precursor authentication protocols. Can we maybe do that from further away?" the human asked, eyeing the reactor, with the wariness of someone who'd suddenly become aware they were standing next to several megatons of barely understood ancient technology. "I've seen the safety briefing. The ones about precursor artifacts usually end with phrases like unsurvivable radiation and catastrophic dimensional collapse. The reactor is stable. Look at the readings. Power output is nominal. Containment fields are holding. There's no indication of..." The reactor emitted a pleasant chime. Every scientist in the crater stopped moving. The sound was cheerful, almost friendly, the sort of noise a helpful computer makes when it's successfully completed a task. It was completely at odds with the enormous ancient artifact that had been radiating hostile silence for nearly 2 decades. A holographic interface materialized directly in front of the human, floating at convenient eye level with the kind of thoughtful UI design that suggested the precursors had strong opinions about user experience. Text scrolled across it in symbols that shifted and reformed, cycling through thousands of languages in rapid succession, before settling on something that looked suspiciously like standard human script. "It's in English," the human said weakly. "What? Sort of ancient English maybe. Some of these words are weird, but I can read it." She squinted at the display, It says, "Welcome, operator. Primary systems online. Please proceed with initialization sequence, or select maintenance mode." The professor made a sound that his translator rendered as stat. 47,000 years. This reactor has been dormant for 47,000 years, and it greets you in your native language. Technically it's greeting me in a language that died out on Earth, like 6,000 years ago, but close enough. Around them the excavation site had descended into controlled chaos. Scientists were arguing in 7 different languages, simultaneously, their translators creating a cacophony of academic distress. Equipment beeped urgently as it recorded data that would take decades to properly analyze and even longer to accept. Someone had started crying, though whether from joy or existential crisis was unclear. The Dreknari engineer who'd first questioned the humans' arrival had gone very still, her multiple eyes fixed on the holographic display with the intensity of someone watching their entire worldview crumble in real time. The linguistic adaptation, that's not translation. The system is native generating language structures, based on her neurological patterns. It's reading her brain and formatting output accordingly. So it likes her brain better than ours, asked a HEC technician, sounding personally offended. It recognizes her brain as an authorized operator class, which means the precursors either were human, evolved humans, created humans, or coincidentally developed identical neurological and biological markers to a species that wouldn't exist for another 47,000. The professor finished, his voice carrying the hollow quality of someone whose life's work had just been rendered simultaneously validated and completely meaningless. Do you understand what this implies? The human was still staring at the holographic interface like it might bite her. That I'm really not qualified for this job. It implies that human biology is the key. The authentication system wasn't locked to keep people out. It was locked to keep everyone out except humans specifically. The precursors wanted this reactor to remain dormant until humans found it. Or I just happened to sneeze at the right angle and trigger some weird failsafe. 17 years, the professor repeated, his voice climbing toward frequencies that Yuthrani vocal cords probably weren't designed to reach. 17 years of the galaxy's finest minds attempting to access this system through legitimate channels. And you trigger it with mucus. The human shrugged helplessly. In my defense, I didn't mean to. The holographic interface chimed again, more insistently this time, like ancient technology that was getting impatient with the lack of response. Text scrolled faster, and even without translation, the message was clear. The reactor was waiting for input, and it had decided the human was the only one qualified to provide it. The reactor's chime escalated into what could only be described as electronic throat clearing, which was impressive considering it was a massive crystalline structure without anything resembling a throat. The holographic interface pulsed with increasing urgency, text scrolling faster like an impatient customer service system that had been waiting on hold for 17 years and was now determined to make up for lost time. The human reached out tentatively, her gloved finger hovering above one of the holographic buttons that had appeared with helpful labels like Initialize Core Functions and System Diagnostic and, inexplicably, Emergency Override Use Only if previous operators were idiots. Don't touch that, the professor warned, which was the kind of statement that guaranteed someone was absolutely going to touch it. It's literally asking me to touch it. Look, there's a progress bar and everything. The human gestured at the display where, indeed, a small animation showed a cheerful cartoon representation of something that might have been a hand, a tentacle, or possibly a very optimistic plant pressing glowing buttons. We need to establish protocols, safety procedures, containment fields, a committee to assess. The reactor made a sound like a cosmic sigh, and suddenly every holographic interface in the excavation site lit up simultaneously. Screens materialized in front of every scientist, each one displaying the same message in their respective languages. Authorization confirmed. Primary operator detected. Secondary personnel recognized as those other people who tried really hard but got it wrong. Please stand by. Did it just insult us? The Dreknari engineer asked, her appendages quivering with indignation. I think it insulted all of us, confirmed the HEC analyst, whose translator was now working overtime to convey shades of mechanical condescension. The precursors programmed SAS into their security systems. The human pressed the initialization button because at this point, What was one more questionable decision in a day full of them? The reactor responded with the enthusiasm of ancient machinery that had been waiting geological ages for someone to finally push the right button in the right way while possessing the right genetic markers and adequate nasal moisture content. Light erupted from the reactor's core. Not the dangerous kind that sterilizes planets, but the impressive kind that makes documentaries look good. Crystalline structures deep within the artifact began rotating, their movements precise and purposeful despite millennia of inactivity. Energy readings spiked across every spectrum simultaneously, sending analysis equipment into cascading alarm states that their manufacturers had assumed would never actually trigger. "Containment fields are holding," shouted a technician over the rising hum of ancient power systems. "Energy output is ascending exponentially but within stable parameters. This shouldn't be possible. Add it to the list," the professor muttered, his earlier panic giving way to the numb acceptance of someone watching the impossible become routine. Right below human sneeze activates Precursor security, and above Reactor has working sense of humor. The ground beneath them began to vibrate, a deep thrumming that resonated in bone and chitin and exoskeleton alike. Dust that had settled 47,000 years ago decided it was time to relocate. Around the crater's edge, research stations rattled and beeped protests as their foundations discovered movement was still possible. Deep within the reactor, something that might have been a cooling system or possibly a very large musical instrument began cycling through startup procedures. Vents opened along the structure's surface, releasing atmosphere that sensors immediately flagged as breathable but weird and probably won't kill you immediately. The air smelled like ozone and time and the particular scent of machinery that had been meticulously maintained right up until its operators mysteriously vanished. Holographic displays multiplied, filling the air with data streams that would take years to fully comprehend and seconds to recognize as significant. Power distribution networks mapped themselves in 3 dimensions, showing energy conduits that extended deep into the planet's crust. Reactor specifications scrolled past in formats that made modern engineering look like enthusiastic cave paintings. Somewhere in the cascade of information, a blueprint appeared for what was either a very advanced starship or a deeply concerning kitchen appliance. "It's showing us everything," breathed the Yuthrani physicist, her ocular sensors darting between displays fast enough to risk inducing seizures. "Reactor specifications, energy conversion rates, matter-antimatter containment protocols. This is technology centuries beyond our current capability." "Centuries?" Another scientist laughed, a sound that suggested sanity was more of a polite suggestion than a requirement. "Try millennia. The energy density alone is impossible according to known physics." The human was frantically scrolling through her personal display, which had helpfully organized itself into categories like basic operations, advanced functions you probably shouldn't touch, and seriously don't touch these unless you want to explain to your supervisor why there's a new black hole. Her expression suggested she was regretting every decision that led to this moment, which was probably most of them. "It wants me to complete the initialization," she said, her voice carrying the special quality of someone reading their own execution order. "There's a whole sequence: biometric confirmation, vocal authorization, and something called final verification protocol." "What does final verification entail?" the professor asked, approaching the nightmare of actually sounding interested. "It's asking me to provide a genetic sample for deep sequence matching." Every scientist within hearing distance went very still. Genetic sampling was routine in galactic science, but having ancient precursor technology request it specifically from a human raised questions that most academic institutions weren't equipped to handle without forming committees that would argue for decades. "Do it," the professor said finally, his plates settling into colors that suggested resignation mixed with desperate curiosity. "We've already crossed every reasonable safety boundary. At this point we might as well see where this..." The human pulled off her glove, revealing the kind of hand that evolution had designed for throwing spears and making tools and occasionally pressing buttons on ancient alien technology. The holographic interface generated a small scanner, floating gently toward her with the bedside manner of medical equipment that had been programmed by beings who understood anxiety. The scan took 3 seconds. The wait for results felt considerably longer. Then the reactor really woke up. If before it had been warming up, now it was fully online and ready to have opinions about its circumstances. The hum shifted into something deeper, a resonance that seemed less like sound and more like reality clearing its throat. Every system that had been dormant flared to life simultaneously. Power levels that had been climbing steadily suddenly spiked into territories that made physicists invoke deities they didn't believe in. The holographic displays all changed at once, text replaced by a single message that appeared in every language simultaneously. Genetic match confirmed. Operator authentication valid. Welcome home, descendants. Descendants, the professor repeated, his voice barely audible over the reactor's ascending hum. It called humans descendant. Oh, that's not ominous at all, the human muttered, staring at her hand like it had personally betrayed her. Descendants of what? Descendants of WHO. The reactor answered by projecting a hologram the size of a small building. It showed a bipedal figure remarkably humanoid standing in what looked like this very excavation site back when it had been a functioning facility instead of an archaeological puzzle. The figure was surrounded by technology that made the current reactor look like a prototype, and their expression carried the particular smugness of beings who'd figured out something profound about the universe and were insufferably pleased about it. Text scrolled beneath the image. Archive entry 47-193. Final log of the Genesis Initiative. Project status. Successful. Biological seeding complete. Temporal lockouts. Engaged. Species designation. Humanity. Projected development time. 50,000 years. Note to future operators. If you're reading this, you made it. Congratulations. Sorry about the security measures. We couldn't risk the others finding this before you were ready. The excavation site had gone absolutely silent except for the reactor's hum, and the sound of several dozen worldviews simultaneously shattering. Scientists stood frozen, processing information that rewrote not just history but the fundamental assumptions about human origins and galactic timeline. The professor found his voice first, though it came out strangled. The precursors, made humans, as a time-locked failsafe, the Draknari engineer added, her appendages hanging limp. They seeded a species on a backwater planet, programmed their technology to only respond to that species' biology, and set everything to wait until humans developed enough to find it. Which means humans aren't just another spacefaring species, the Heck analyst continued, his translator finally catching up with the implications. They're precursor descendants, direct biological inheritors of the most advanced civilization in galactic history. The human looked at the assembled aliens, at the reactor at her own traitorous hand, and then back at the holographic projection of smug ancient beings who'd apparently decided to play the longest practical joke in history. I'm going to need this in writing, and maybe therapy, definitely therapy. The reactor chimed approvingly and began downloading approximately 47,000 years of accumulated data directly into every storage device in the excavation site, completely overwhelming their capacity and forcing them to start deleting things like important research notes and colony administration files to make room for complete precursor technical specifications. And Why We Did the Thing with the Humans, a memoir. Somewhere in orbit, communication satellites began frantically transmitting reports to 7 different governments that would all immediately form committees, which would form subcommittees, which would argue for years about who had jurisdiction over the human who'd sneezed on ancient technology and accidentally proved she was descended from God. The aftermath of cosmic revelation played out exactly as one might expect, with paperwork panic and several competing claims about who deserved credit for a discovery they'd actively tried to prevent. Within 6 hours of the reactor's full activation, the excavation site had transformed from archaeological dig to bureaucratic war zone, complete with representatives from every major galactic power and several minor ones who'd shown up hoping nobody would notice they weren't invited. The humans sat on an equipment crate at the crater's edge, watching ships descend through the atmosphere with the resigned expression of someone who'd accidentally started an interstellar incident before lunch. Her environmental suit was still covered in ancient dust, her nose still in. The universe apparently didn't care about either of these facts. Professor Zenthalok stood nearby, his plates cycling through colors that his species typically reserved for existential crises, and really bad tax audits. In his manipulator appendage, he held 17 different official requests for documentation, 12 demands for exclusive research access, and 1 marriage proposal from a Draknari dignitary, who'd apparently decided that aligning bloodlines with precursor descendants
was solid political strategy. "They're calling it the Genesis Revelation," he said, voice hollow. 17 years I spent trying to access that reactor. 17 years of my life. My reputation, my sanity, and the solution was respiratory Could have been worse, the human offered, popping open a ration pack that tasted like regret and artificial flavoring. Could have been a hiccup. A Yuthrani diplomatic attaché descended from the newest shuttle, flanked by guards whose body language suggested they were guarding against threats both external and metaphysical. She approached with the measured steps of someone navigating a minefield composed entirely of career consequence. "On behalf of the Yuthrani collective, we formally request comprehensive biological analysis." "And no," the human said through a mouthful of ration bar, "historical documentation and technological transfer protocols." "And
I'm sorry, did you say no?" I said no. I'm not a lab experiment. I'm a technician who sneezed on the wrong artifact at the wrong time. The attaché's translator struggled with conveying aristocratic outrage. "You are the key to understanding precursor technology. The genetic inheritor of the galaxy's most advanced civilization. Surely you understand the significance." "I understand. I've got another 6 maintenance contracts lined up after this one, and they all pay better than standing around getting poked by scientists." Behind them, the reactor hummed contentedly, its systems fully online and operating at levels that made conventional physics file formal complaint. The data downloads had finished approximately 3 hours ago, leaving every research institution in 7-star systems with more information than they could process in decades. Initial analysis suggested the precursors had been insufferably thorough, documenting everything from reactor specifications to what they'd eaten for breakfast on the day they decided to create humanity as an insurance policy against their own extinction. The professor had been reading those files obsessively, his academic excitement warring with the dawning horror of understanding. "They did it because they were dying," he said suddenly, staring at his datapad. "The precursor, they'd achieved technological transcendence, pushed themselves beyond physical form, and it was killing them, making them too abstract to maintain their own infrastructure. So they created humans. Biological, physical, solid, everything they'd stopped being. They seeded Earth, programmed the reactor to wait, and then they ascended, or died. The files aren't clear on the distinction. So humans are what? The janitors of precursor civilization?" the human asked. "Inheritor, designed to eventually reach the stars, find these facilities, and claim the technology their creators left behind." The security systems weren't keeping everyone out. They were keeping everything safe until you showed up. By checking if we could sneeze properly. By checking if you matched the biological template they'd engineered 47,000 years ago. The sneeze was just delivery mechanism. The professor's plates rippled with something that might have been humor, or possibly a minor seizure. They built redundancy into their plan. Any human could have activated it. You just happened to be the first one to get close enough while having allergies. More ships descended, bringing more officials, more demands, more complications. A HEC administrator wanted to establish oversight committee. A Dreknari military advisor suggested protective custody for the human's own safety. Someone from the Galactic Union started talking about heritage preservation protocols, and got as far as mandatory registration before the human threw her ration bar wrapper at them. The reactor, oblivious to the politics swirling around it, continued operating flawlessly. Its power output could theoretically supply energy to 36 star systems simultaneously. Its data storage contained technological specifications that would revolutionize everything from starship drives to medical equipment, to particularly aggressive kitchen appliances. All of it, according to the files, designed to be operated by humans specifically and anyone else only with explicit human authorization. 47,000 years ago, beings of impossible advancement had looked at their own transcendence and realized they needed someone to keep the lights on after they left. So they'd made human, stubborn, physical, biological humans who'd crawl out of caves and eventually to the stars, carrying in their DNA the keys to technology their creators had left behind. And the first thing one of them had done upon finding that technology was sneeze on it. The professor started laughing,
a chittering sound that his translator rendered as something between hysteria and enlightenment. 17 years, he wheezed. Quantum decryption, temporal authentication, biometric scanning across 7 dimensions, and the precursors built a system that accepted UCAS as valid credentials. Maybe they had a sense of humor, the humans suggested. Maybe they understood that biology is messy and unpredictable and brilliant in ways transcendent beings forget. He gestured at the reactor, at the assembled ships, at the galaxy's bureaucracy, trying to categorize the uncategorizable. They made you imperfect, deliberately, because perfection is what killed them. The human finished her ration pack, crumpled the wrapper, and stood up with the decisive movement of someone who'd reached their limit for cosmic significance. I'm filing this job as complete. Standard rates, plus hazard pay for activating ancient artifacts, plus a substantial bonus for discovering I'm descended from extinct god beings who left me their stuff. You can't just leave, the Ythrani attaché protested. Watch me. The reactor's online. The data's downloaded. You've got 50,000 years of technical manuals to read. I've got 5 more contracts and a really desperate need for a shower that doesn't recycle water from yesterday's mistakes. She started walking toward her shuttle, past officials and scientists and guards who didn't quite know if they were supposed to stop her. The reactor's interface chimed as she passed, displaying a final message. Thank you for activating this facility. The precursors appreciate your cooperation. Please enjoy your inheritance. Try not to blow anything up. The human glanced back once at the crystalline structure, at the professor who was still laughing, at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, who were all trying to process the fact that the galaxy's greatest mystery had been solved by respiratory function. Tell them I sneezed, she called back. Make sure that goes in all the official reports. I want historians 50,000 years from now to know that humanity's grand inheritance started with allergy. Her shuttle lifted off, leaving behind chaos, revelation, and several dozen officials arguing about jurisdictional authority over precursor artifacts. The reactor hummed peacefully, finally fulfilling its purpose after millennia of patient waiting. And somewhere in whatever form they'd achieved beyond physical existence, the precursors were probably laughing at a practical joke that had taken 47,000 years to pay off. The professor looked down at his datapad, at 17 years of failed research, rendered simultaneously obsolete and vindicated, and started writing his report. The title practically wrote itself, On the Activation of Precursor Technology Through Unintended Biological Discharge, a Case Study in Humility. It would win awards, spark debates, and completely fail to capture the absurdity of the universe's greatest security system, accepting a sneeze as the password. But then again, that was rather the point. Chat control.